My sophomore year of high school, I gained access to one of these hotel-style weight rooms. Not a real weight room with clinking and big heavy weights that you slide on and off of bars, but pulleys and stuff where you move the pulley and you have a little pin and you shift it between these little weight bricks that have arbitrary numbers painted on them that could mean anything. So I had this weight sled. It was like a squat machine that I would get on. I was like, man, I keep getting better at this thing. And every couple weeks, I just moved the pin down until finally I just maxed out the machine at 500 pounds. And I was like, I only weigh 100 pounds. I'm like an ant. Well, I'm hanging out with some teammates from my baseball team, and they're all talking about what they do in the weight room and how much they can squat. And I'm like, oh, I can chime in on this one. I do a little bit of squatting myself. 500 pounds worth, and I actually don't know how much more than that I can do because the machine can't even measure it. And they were like, no, you can't. You are mistaken. And further, how about you give me $1 for every pound below 500 that you can actually squat when we put you on an actual squat rack? And I was like, okay, abort. If y'all are that confident, I'm pretty sure that I don't actually know what I'm talking about. They were right. I would have paid them a tremendous amount of money when we actually put it to the test, and I would still pay them a tremendous amount of money because 500 pounds is kind of an embarrassing story, but it's a good example of a very basic human social interaction. Somebody makes what seems like an outlandish claim. People who are reasonable and skeptical say, prove it, and then the claim maker can either prove it or back down and embarrass themselves. In Luke chapter 4, what we've got is the beginning of Jesus being in front of people. So far, we've had a big, long birth narrative and the backstory, and Jesus has gone through this difficult time of testing. But as we get into the middle of chapter 4, he's getting in front of other people. And he's making, frankly, some outlandish claims. Stuff that rightly caused people to say, I don't know about that. Prove it. And now Jesus is going to have a choice. Can he back up these outrageous claims? Or is he going to have to wilt like 100-pound sophomore version of me? Well, we wouldn't still be talking about Jesus 2,000 years later if he wilted like I did. So spoiler alert, he goes off and impresses everybody and backs up those claims. But let's look at how this actually unfolds in Luke chapter 4, 13 through the end of the chapter, which is a lot of reading. You can pause and do that now, and then we'll get after it. So as we come into this passage, you got to remember that the famous Jesus who we picture is not the famous Jesus here. Nobody really knows or cares much about who he is. There's a whole birth narrative thing that looked interesting, but it's been 30 years since then at this point. And so Jesus hits his fame curve over the course of 2 verses right here. He shows up, it says, in the power of the Spirit. News about him spreads all over the countryside. He goes around, he teaches, he's doing stuff. People are starting to wonder if, this is kind of the new it guy. And a few people are starting to wonder if maybe he's even more than just an exciting new teacher on the teaching scene. So he goes to Nazareth, which of course is, the town he was raised in. And he walks into the synagogue and they hand him the scroll and he opens it. It's from the prophet Isaiah. He opens to what we would call chapter 62, verses 1 and 2. And he reads this. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. To you and me, Jesus' words sound like warm-feeling Christmas carols, vague notions of redemption, things getting better, and then you light some candles and you sing a song, you open presents, and that's that. To the original audience, this is huge language to invoke. Jesus is drawing on the hope language of the prophets at the end of the Old Testament. See, God had made promises to Abraham and Moses and David about how all of this redemption is going to come through them. Specifically, there's going to be this great king that comes out of the line of kings from David, who's going to rule forever on this great throne of this great kingdom, and everything that's broken about the world, not just for Jewish people, but for everybody, is going to be made right through this. This is the hope of what they look forward to. And then it all gets wrecked because Assyria comes along, Babylon comes along, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans come along, and it's just this brutal succession of, frankly, governments and warfare and conquest and empires seeming to just bulldoze these promises that God has made about redemption. But there's this glimmer of hope because prophets like Isaiah talk about this little shoot, this little this little stem growing up out of the rubble and the death and the destruction metaphorically over all these years, and that this little shoot from the line of David, the family of Jesse, that's David's dad, is going to bring with it all of this hope. And so in the first part of Luke, we have this language about Jesus being descended from that family, about Jesus ticking a lot of the boxes and the way he was born and what he did in his early life that would make it seem like he could be that guy. And then Jesus suddenly gets super famous, and he rolls in here and he opens this scroll, and what's the first thing he reads? Like, to you and me, that's a lovely thing for him to read. To the original audience, it's, whoa, whoa, you can't read that unless you mean it. You are making gigantic claims, bro. And Jesus makes it really clear that it wasn't an accident, because he rolls up the scroll and everybody's just quiet and staring at him. And then it's like he, walks back up to the mic and like, boop, boop, woo. Yeah, just so you know, today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. Whoa! He just doubled down on that claim. He did not back away or shrink in the moment. He meant to say that. Well, throughout the rest of the New Testament, the Gospels, people tend to get fussy with Jesus when he says stuff like this. But in this moment, people are pretty intrigued and excited. And rather than riding that wave of approval, Jesus pushes back and he says, a prophet's not accepted in his own town, ultimately. And further, he points to like the darkest days in Israel's history, back in 1 Kings, when the prophets Elijah and Elisha were around. And he gives a couple examples of these horrible, apostate, evil times in the history of Israel happening, and God still working, but working to like help Gentiles and not them. Well, wow. Talk about just ruining a lovely, beautiful moment. Talk about wrecking the approval that you're enjoying. So Jesus comes right back with, frankly, a criticism, saying that this moment needs redeeming too, and hinting again that this redemption isn't just going to be for the Jewish people, that they need to re-envision that glimmer of hope notion that they hold with them from the Old Testament prophets, because it's going to be a much bigger thing. And now people aren't happy and excited and saying, oh, was that Joseph's son? That was amazing. I feel such warm things in my heart. Instead, they're like, we should kill this guy. And they switch to being super, super mad. They're furious, it says. They drive him out of town. They take him up to this hill, one that he maybe went sledding on as a kid, maybe not. And they decide they're just going to throw him off of there and murder him. But Jesus somehow, in one of the weirdest miracles in the New Testament, just walks through this mob, walks through this crowd, and goes on his way to do the other things that he's supposed to do. Wasn't his time. Now, there's like 50 levels deeper that we can go in tearing into what Jesus is saying there in regard to the Old Testament. But for the purposes of moving through the rest of chapter 4, I think the best way to look at it for now is just that he's made an incredibly dramatic claim. One far more dramatic than 100-pound me claiming to be able to squat 500 pounds. And people effectively are calling him on it. Yeah, prove that. Angry people would be saying that, but also the squishy middle would be saying that. The crowds, as the New Testament describes them, the people who are trying to size Jesus up. I think a lot of them would have felt like, I want that to be true. I want Jesus to be the one. Of course I want redemption to happen. Of course I want to see this ball get rolling in my lifetime. I want to put eyes on that. That would be incredible to be on the stage of history when God initiates this most important culminating phase of his redemptive plan. But also, come on, lots of people claim stuff like this. I mean, we got a dude in living memory of us who wrote a science fiction novel and made a whole giant controlling religion out of it that people still sign up for. People make these kind of claims all the time. Can Jesus back it up? And so as we move forward, well, we see that, frankly, he can. And it's not just in chapter 4, but it's moving on throughout the next chunk of Luke. So next we've got this encounter in Capernaum, which effectively becomes Jesus' new hometown. We know that Peter was from there. This is a town that you can still go and visit. You can go and look at the place where Jesus probably lived and ate and hung out. It probably was Peter's house. You can go to the synagogue that was there, or one that is a remodeled version of the one that was there when Jesus was there. You can go to the place where Jesus went to church. You can go down the little harbor where Jesus probably set out on boats from time to time, sometimes for profound reasons, maybe sometimes to go out and grab some fish. So he's in Capernaum, and crazy things happen there. There's a demon possession that he deals with. In this video, I'm not going to dive all the way into what on earth we do with claims like that, but it was a pretty big deal to the people at the time. So apparently this was a problem. They understood it was a problem, and it was a problem that they did not have the means to fix, which made it remarkable when Jesus, with a word, could resolve this kind of stuff. And there's an interesting exchange in this particular exorcism, if we want to use that term, that happens between verse 31 and 37 of chapter 4. Jesus is engaging with the demons, not the person they're possessing, and they call him Jesus of Nazareth, and they call him the Holy One of God. And so what's so interesting is that all of Galilee is asking the question, who is this guy? And the right confession of who Jesus is actually comes from demons who recognize him for who he is. And Jesus silences them and delivers this guy. And people say, what is this teaching? What authority and power he gives, orders to evil spirits, and they come out. And the news about this spreads all over the place. So, all right, Jesus effectively has stepped up to the squat rack once and been like loaded up with everything, and he's powered that out. He's backed up his claim. Well, then we get an account of just a whole bunch of healings that are going on, and all of this stuff corresponds pretty neatly with stuff in the Gospel of Matthew as well, so it's kind of fun to compare notes between the two. If you want to go and look at that, you can learn more about what he did here. So Peter's mother-in-law has got this high fever. Jesus rebukes the fever. I don't know how that works. I've tried that. It's never worked for me. But it's cured, and she gets up and she's functional. And then other people hear about this, and we get the impression that a whole bunch of people start crowding in because they want to see him do it again and again, or maybe more likely than wanting it proven, they just want to be delivered from the things that are wrong with them as well. So it says in verse 42, at daybreak, Jesus went out to a solitary place. The people were looking for him, and when they came to where he was, they tried to keep him from leaving. But he said, I must preach the good news of the kingdom of God to other towns also, because that is why I was sent. And he kept on preaching in the synagogues of Judea. This is very important, because what this means is that the healing and the miraculous stuff that frankly is sometimes kind of hard for us to know what to do with never was the point. He wasn't just picking the very, very best people and giving them miracles because of their faith and their belief that the Lord can do mighty things for them today if your donation is just large enough and your commitment is just great. No, that's complete nonsense. That kind of stuff is garbage that we make up today that is heresy and manipulation and frankly just a way to extract money from gullible people. This is totally different. These miracles served the purpose of making a theological statement about the reality of who Jesus was in support of the claim that Jesus made from the prophet Isaiah, I am the one who is predicted, who is this great king, who is to come and fix all this stuff and to bring about redemption. And people didn't know exactly what that was going to look like yet. But even if they wanted to doubt and be skeptical, he just kept doing so many things that break the laws of time and space and physics in front of the eyes of masses of people, both skeptical and those who liked him, that it just became undeniable that he was different, and that maybe, just maybe, this Jesus who was exploding onto the scene was going to be able to back up the incredibly bold claim, the intonation he was making, that he really was the Messiah, the promised one of God, who was going to come and do all of the redemptive stuff that God had promised so long ago. The Bible is an enormous book. Luke in and of itself is a really big book. So if you're looking at this with me and you're like, I don't know, I kind of see that. I kind of wonder if maybe you're reading things into it a little bit. That's a fair question. And I'm not the perfect Bible interpreter, so maybe, but you know how we can find out? Just keep looking at Luke together. So I would invite you to hang in. Let's chip away at this book together. And I really think what we're going to find is that there is stuff we can say for certain that is being put forward by this book. It's not all just a ton of opinions. If you break it down to tiny little elemental levels, it's a lot easier for everybody to just read a phrase and be like, well, that's my opinion. And that's my opinion. And then to get discouraged and be like, well, it's what kills me about religion and God and all of this stuff. It's all just dumb opinions. Yeah, but I think Luke is a great place to start to push past that and to say, oh no, this is what the Bible actually says. This is who Jesus was actually holding himself out as being, and then to decide whether you're into that or not. And ultimately, nobody gets to make that decision but you. So you get to pick whether or not this makes sense, but it's kind of fun to slowly game it out together and get to a place where we can decide how we're going to respond to it based on the actual merits of what it says instead of things that we hear about it secondhand. So I'm up for that. I'm having fun with it. I'm learning a lot with it. I hope you are as well. Thanks for being a part of this thing. Some of you choose to support this channel on Patreon, which is both insane and ridiculously appreciated. You make it so that I can cover the costs of making this happen, keep me motivated to stay after it and keep doing this stuff. So thanks a ton to those of you who do that. Some of you who don't do that want to, patreon.com/TMBH. If you'd rather not, that's cool. Thanks for being here either way. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. We'll see you soon.